While preparing dinner for my husband's entire family, I stepped into the garage for more chairs and heard his sister say, "I still can't believe you married this caterer. Dad's right, you need to divorce her before you have kids and get stuck forever." He replied, "Already working on it. My lawyer says we can take half her business too." I returned with the chairs and continued hosting with a perfect smile. 3 days later, my WhatsApp was flooded with 47 desperate messages begging me. "Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story." Something felt off about Preston the week before his family dinner. It wasn't the normal kind of off, like when he was stressed about a case at the law firm or annoyed that I'd left a stack of my catering invoices on the kitchen island again. This was different, a subtle chill in the air that you can't quite name. He kept checking his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, his thumb swiping furiously before shoving it back in his pocket with a casualness that was anything but. He'd switch tabs on his laptop the second I walked behind him, the quick click of the mouse a little too loud in our quiet house. He started taking his calls out on the back patio, closing the sliding glass door behind him, his voice a low murmur I couldn't decipher. After 7 years together, you develop a sixth sense, a sort of marital radar. It's like how I can tell when a sauce is about to break just by the slightest change in its sheen. I knew something was wrong, but I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was just the pressure from his job getting to him. Look, I never thought I'd be one of those people, sitting in front of a camera, airing my dirty laundry for the world to see. It's not my style. I'm a private person. But I'm sitting here in my new, mostly empty apartment, with my dog Buster sleeping at my feet, and I have to get this out. I feel like if I keep it inside, it'll poison me. I need to tell someone what happened, and you all, my internet strangers, you're getting the front row seats to the whole damn show. For some background, I'm Eleanor, but everyone who knows me calls me Ellie. I'm 34. I own a catering and event design business, Gatherings by Eleanor, that I built from the absolute ground up. I mean that literally. I dropped out of community college because my family couldn't afford it, and I started this business with $500 I'd saved from waitressing. It began with just me, a beat-up 20-year-old van that smelled faintly of rust, and a set of mismatched chafing dishes I bought at a garage sale. I worked 18-hour days, my hands raw from chopping and scrubbing, my back aching from hauling equipment. Now, after years of relentless work, I have 2 full-time staff, a gleaming commercial kitchen, and a roster of high-end clients across the state. It's not a massive corporation, but it's mine. It pays the bills, it provides a good salary for my employees, and it's the source of all my pride. Preston, my husband, well, my soon-to-be ex-husband, is 32. He's a lawyer, a very successful one now. When we met, he was just a broke student with big dreams. I fell for his ambition, his charm. I supported him through every single day of law school. And when I say supported, I don't mean emotionally. I mean I paid for it. I paid the college tuition with the money from my first big wedding catering gigs. I covered our rent on our tiny apartment, the one with the leaky faucet and the neighbors who fought all the time. I paid for his expensive textbooks, his interview suits, all of it, while I was building my business from nothing. He comes from an upper-middle-class family that never, not once, let me forget that I wasn't one of them. His dad, Arthur, is an investment banker who always spoke to me with a sort of bemused condescension, like a king observing a particularly industrious peasant. His mom, Harriet, sells luxury real estate and has a talent for compliments that feel like insults. And his older sister, Brenda, who has an MBA from a school she never fails to mention, thinks her opinions are gifts to mankind. Here's the thing, I always knew they thought he could do better. The little side comments about my party planning business or the pointed questions about when I'd go back to get a real degree were constant. At every family gathering, I felt like I was on trial. But Preston, my Preston, always defended me. He'd wrap his arm around me and say, "Ellie is the hardest working person I know." He made me believe that we were a team, us against them. At least, that's what I thought. Last Saturday was the annual spring dinner at our house. It was a tradition Preston's mother, Harriet, had insisted on, a chance for her to inspect our home, judge my cooking, and for the family to gather under one roof. I spent the entire weekend getting ready. I designed a menu meant to impress, a 7-hour slow-roasted brisket with a secret coffee rub, Gruyere and thyme potato gratin, roasted asparagus with lemon tarragon butter, and a homemade sourdough bread. For dessert, a chocolate lava cake that was pure decadence. Everything had to be perfect. For him. For them. Preston was more tense than usual, pacing the house, snapping at me for small things like using the wrong serving platter. Not that one, Ellie, Mom hates silver. I just chalked it up to the usual stress of hosting his family. I just wanted the night to be over. They all arrived promptly at 4 o'clock. His parents, Arthur and Harriet, sweeping in like royalty. His sister Brenda and her quiet, perpetually startled-looking husband. And his younger brother, Leo, who was still in grad school and was, honestly, the only one of them I ever felt truly comfortable around. He was the only one who ever asked about my business with genuine interest. Harriet immediately started critiquing the new curtains in the living room, a bit bold, Eleanor, don't you think? While Arthur clapped Preston on the back and asked how business was going, ignoring me completely. I just smiled, took their coats, and offered them a drink, the perfect hostess. The first hour was a blur of forced pleasantries. Brenda talked endlessly about a lavish trip to Italy they were planning. Arthur grilled Preston about a recent case, using a lot of financial jargon designed to exclude me. I floated between the kitchen and the living room, refilling glasses, passing out appetizers, my smile feeling more and more like a mask. By 6, we were ready to eat. I'd set the dining table with our good plates, the ones we got as wedding gifts and used maybe twice a year. The candles were lit, the food was hot, everything looked like a magazine spread. As everyone started to take their seats, I did a quick head count and realized we were 2 chairs short. No problem, I said with a cheerful smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'll just grab a couple from the garage. I headed out through the side door into the cool evening air, completely unaware that in the next 60 seconds, my entire world was going to be leveled. The air outside was crisp, a welcome relief from the stuffy, formal atmosphere inside. I walked along the stone path that wrapped around the side of the house toward the detached garage. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn I'd spent hours on that morning. The scent of my neighbor's blooming jasmine filled the air. It was a perfect, peaceful evening. As I rounded the corner, past the big azalea bushes my mother had helped me plant the first year we moved in, I heard voices. Preston and his sister, Brenda. They were huddled together near the AC unit, sharing a cigarette, a habit he'd supposedly quit years ago at my insistence. I was about to call out to them, to ask if they could give me a hand with the chairs, but then I heard my name, spoken with such venom that it stopped me in my tracks. Brenda's voice, sharp and condescending, cut through the quiet twilight. I still can't believe you married this caterer, she said, taking a long, theatrical drag from her cigarette. Honestly, Preston. You have a real future, a real career. Dad's right, you need to divorce her before you have kids and get stuck forever. My heart stopped. It wasn't a figure of speech, I literally felt the blood stop pumping in my veins. My breath hitched in my throat. I stood there, hidden by the deep green leaves of the azaleas, unable to move, unable to breathe. It was an out-of-body experience. I was watching a scene from a movie, and I was the tragic, clueless heroine. I waited for Preston to defend me. To tell his sister she was out of line. To say anything. What he said next felt like a sledgehammer to the chest, shattering every bone, every memory, every hope I ever had. Already working on it, he replied, his voice chillingly casual, as if they were discussing the weather. My lawyer says we can take half her business too. He said it. And then they laughed. A quiet, conspiratorial laugh that echoed in the silence of the evening and shattered my world into a million, glittering, razor-sharp pieces. I stood there, completely numb, as they kept talking. Something about someone named Vanessa being a much better fit for him, for the image he needed to project to make partner at his firm. He'd wasted his best years with me while I was playing with food, and now it was time to cash in his investment. Have you ever had a moment where your entire reality just shifts? Where the ground beneath your feet disappears and you're in a free fall? 7 years of marriage. The countless late nights I stayed up helping him study for his law exams, quizzing him with flashcards until my voice was hoarse. The vacations we skipped so he could afford his textbooks. The extra catering jobs I took on weekends to help pay down his student loans. All of it, every sacrifice, every loving gesture, suddenly looked different in the harsh, ugly light of what I had just heard. It wasn't a partnership. It was a long con. And I was the mark. But I didn't scream. I didn't run out there and confront them. A strange, terrifying calm washed over me. Something inside of me, something deep down that I didn't even know existed, went ice cold. The hurt was so immense it transformed into something else. Something hard and clear and dangerous. I quietly backed away, my feet making no sound on the soft grass. I went into the garage, my movements mechanical, like a robot. I grabbed 2 folding chairs. I stood there for a moment in the dusty dimness, took 3 deep, shaky breaths, and plastered the fakest, brightest, most convincing smile of my life onto my face. Walking back inside, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked perfectly normal. My hair was in place, my apron was clean. On the inside, I was a nuclear wasteland. The rest of that dinner was surreal. I was an actress giving the performance of a lifetime. I floated back to the table, sat down the chairs, and said, "Here we go," with a brightness that felt alien in my own mouth. I poured wine, I carved the brisket I had so lovingly prepared, my hands steady as a surgeon's. I laughed at Arthur's terrible, self-congratulatory jokes. And I watched my husband, this complete and utter stranger sitting across the table from me, act as if everything was perfectly normal. I studied his face, the face I had woken up next to for 2,555 days, trying to find the man I married. Had he always looked at me with that barely concealed contempt, or was I just seeing it for the first time? When his mother, Harriet, complimented the brisket and asked for my secret recipe, I nearly lost it. 7 years of family dinners, of her subtle digs and backhanded compliments, and now she decides I might have something worth knowing. "It's all in the dry aging process, Harriet," I said, my voice smooth as silk, while my brain screamed insults at her. At one point, Leo, the younger brother, gave me this strange, searching look, like he was trying to figure something out. He asked me if I was feeling okay, that I seemed a bit quiet. I just smiled and blamed it on the stress of the dinner. "You know how it is, Leo. I just want everything to be perfect." He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. I wondered if he knew. If he had any idea about the rot that had infested his brother's heart. After dessert, Brenda, feeling victorious, raised a toast. "To family," she said, her eyes glinting with malice. "And to exciting future changes." She looked directly at Preston with this smug little smirk. "My Preston." He smiled back at her. I raised my crystal glass, the one that cost a fortune, and clinked it against theirs, the sound echoing in the silent battlefield of my mind. I was thinking about how satisfying it would be to snap the delicate stem and press it against her throat. When they finally left around 11, trailing compliments about the food that now sounded like insults, Preston started helping me clear the table, humming to himself. Humming. Like he hadn't just orchestrated the complete and utter destruction of our entire life. I told him I'd finish the dishes, that he should get some rest. He kissed my cheek. "You're such a good wife, Ellie," he said, his breath warm on my skin. The sheer audacity of it, the cold-blooded hypocrisy, nearly made me vomit right there on our wedding china. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. After he went upstairs, I waited. I heard the shower turn on, then off. I waited until the house was completely silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. Then I went to his office. The room was dark, smelling of leather and his expensive cologne. I sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. It was password protected, which was new. He used to leave it open all the time. But I knew him. I knew the patterns he used. His mother's birthday. The name of his childhood dog. The anniversary of his first big case. Third try, I was in. The first thing I found were the emails. A folder labeled Simply Personal. My hand trembled as I clicked on it. Inside was a chain of correspondence with a divorce lawyer. It started 3 months ago. The plan was laid out with chilling, sociopathic clarity. He was waiting to secure a partnership at his firm, a promotion that was coming up in the next few months. He would use my income and our joint assets to maintain his image of a stable, successful married man until the promotion was locked in. Then, once he was secure, he would file for divorce. There were spreadsheets. Meticulously organized spreadsheets documenting every asset of my business, my equipment, my van, my client list, even my projected earnings for the next 5 years. He had done a complete valuation. There was a timeline. A goddamn Microsoft project timeline for my life imploding, with milestones like secure partnership, file petition, begin asset division. And then I saw it. A folder named Financials. Inside, transfer records. He'd been moving small amounts of money from our joint account to a separate, private account for months. Always just under the amount that would trigger an automatic notification from the bank. $950 here. $800 there. Smart. He was a lawyer, after all. He knew how to be smart. I quickly logged into our joint savings account online. The account where I'd been pouring every spare dollar for a down payment on a larger commercial kitchen space. A space that was meant to be the next big step for my business. Our future. My future. $20,000 was missing. Gone. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse as I opened his messaging app. There was a conversation with someone saved as V. My stomach plunged. I clicked. Vanessa. The texts went back 6 months. 6. Damn. Months. They weren't just physical. They were intimate. Jokes, plans, complaints about me. Ellie's working another weekend, of course, one of his texts read. More time for us. Another from her, soon we won't have to sneak around. It was a whole secret life, happening right under my nose. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there in the dark of his office until the sun came up, just staring at the screen, the words burning themselves into my memory. I felt hollowed out, a fragile shell of the woman I was just hours before. The next day, I operated on autopilot. I got a big order out for a client, my hands moving through the familiar motions of chopping and sautéing while my mind was a million miles away. On Monday, I called in sick to work, the first time in 3 years, and while Preston was at the office, I met with a divorce attorney of my own. A woman named Diane, sharp and no-nonsense, who a friend had recommended. Her office was on the 30th floor of a downtown skyscraper, all glass and steel. It felt cold and intimidating. I sat in a leather chair that was too big for me, clutching a folder of the screenshots I'd taken, my hands clammy. I told her everything. The whole sordid story. I showed her the screenshots of the emails, the spreadsheets, the texts. She listened patiently, her face impassive. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair. Diane laid it out for me, straight. In this state, your business, even though you started it before the marriage, is likely considered a marital asset because its value grew substantially during the marriage. He has a claim to half of that growth. Even though he'd never lifted a finger to help with it. Even though I had built it from nothing while supporting him through school. When she told me the potential settlement amount, the number was so staggering I almost blacked out. Everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed for, cut in half and handed to the man who was planning to blindside me. I remember asking her, my voice barely a whisper, so I just let him take it? She gave me a small, determined smile. No, Ellie. We don't just let him take it. We fight. She started talking about legal strategies, amicable settlements, and minimizing damages, but my mind was already gone. Something fundamental had shifted inside me that night in his office. The grief was turning into rage. A cold, quiet, calculating rage. That night, Preston came home with soup from my favorite deli, acting concerned. Feeling any better, honey? He asked, putting his hand on my forehead to check for a fever. The performance was Oscar-worthy. I played along. I said I was just tired, probably coming down with something. I thanked him for caring. I told him I loved him. He said it back without a moment's hesitation, those 3 meaningless words falling from his lips while he was actively planning my financial execution. That night, as I lay awake watching him sleep peacefully beside me, probably dreaming about spending my money with Vanessa, something hardened inside me. A clarity I had never felt before. You see, Preston and his family had always underestimated me. They saw the flower on my apron and the lack of a fancy degree and assumed I was simple. They never understood that building something from nothing, the way I had, requires intelligence. It requires strategy. And most of all, it requires patience. Preston wants a war? Fine. But he's bringing a butter knife to a chainsaw fight. This isn't about money anymore. It's about showing him, and his entire smug family, exactly who they decided to mess with. The caterer they looked down on for 7 years is about to give them a masterclass in consequences. The morning after I met with my lawyer, Preston left for work like any other day. He kissed me goodbye, reminded me to call the plumber about the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, and asked if I could pick up his dry cleaning. The absolute, staggering normality of it was surreal. It was like watching someone sleepwalk through a minefield they had planted themselves. The second his car pulled out of the driveway, I got to work. My first call was to my accountant, Walter, for an emergency meeting. Not at my office, and definitely not over the phone. We met at a small, quiet coffee shop down the street, a place where no one would know us. Walter is an older guy, meticulous and trustworthy, with glasses perched on the end of his nose. He's been with me since I could finally afford a proper accountant instead of doing my own taxes at the kitchen table. When I laid out the whole story for him, the color drained from his face. But then he looked even more unsettled. Ellie, he said, his voice low. I need to show you something. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now. He pulled out his tablet. It turns out Preston had already contacted him a few weeks ago. He claimed he wanted to help me prepare for a potential investor meeting and asked some innocent questions about business valuation methods and ownership documentation. Walter, not knowing what was really happening, had given him some surface-level info but had felt uncomfortable enough to make a note of it. But it was worse than that. Walter started pulling up transaction records from the past few years. These highlighted ones, he said, pointing to a dozen different entries. They don't quite add up. Preston, my brilliant lawyer husband, had been creating a paper trail. Not to steal money directly, he was too smart for that. He was creating a paper trail to make it look like I was mishandling my own business funds. Small discrepancies in dates, amounts moved between accounts at odd times, invoices with inconsistent numbering. Nothing illegal, but enough to make things look messy in divorce court. Enough to justify bringing in a forensic accountant, which would cost me a fortune in legal fees and drag out the proceedings for months, all while making me look incompetent and justifying his claim to take over. Walter and I spent the next 3 hours in that coffee shop, hunched over his tablet and my books. We documented everything properly. We created clear, undeniable trails showing that every single transaction was legitimate. We accelerated payments to suppliers, paid off equipment loans early, and compiled a mountain of documentation proving Preston's complete and total non-involvement in the business's operations. While we were working, I got a text. It was from Leo, Preston's younger brother. This was unusual. He asked if we could meet for coffee sometime soon, said he needed to talk about something important. My heart skipped a beat. I agreed to meet him the next day, a knot of dread and hope tightening in my stomach. My next stop was the bank. I'd been stewing on something Brenda had said at that dinner, a comment about their parents helping Preston when the time comes. I had a hunch, and in my line of work, hunches often save your ass from a disaster. At the bank, I spoke with our financial advisor, a woman I'd known for years. And I confirmed what I suspected. 2 weeks ago, Preston had applied for a home equity line of credit against our house. A HELOC for $200,000. The house that was primarily in my name because I had made the down payment with my pre-marriage savings. The house that I had personally renovated, adding nearly $100,000 in value with my own sweat and design skills. I was still listed as a required co-signatory, but the paperwork was already moving through the system. 1 more week, and he would have had access to $250,000 in cash that I would be partially responsible for repaying after the divorce. After the advisor helped me cancel the application, her face a mixture of shock and sympathy, I did something else. I had him move half of our joint savings into my personal account. Exactly the amount I had contributed. Was it petty? Maybe. But it was a hell of a lot less than what he was planning to take from me. When I got home that evening, I did something I'm not proud of, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I installed tiny recording devices in our living room and in our home office. Completely legal in our state, since it's my house too, but it definitely crossed an ethical line I never thought I'd approach. I needed more evidence. I needed to hear it from his own mouth, irrefutable and undeniable. The setup was tense, my hands fumbling with the tiny electronics, my ears straining for the sound of his car in the driveway. That night over dinner, Preston seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. When his phone buzzed again, I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen, Vanessa. Who's Vanessa? I asked, keeping my voice as casual as I could while reaching for the salad bowl. The fork paused halfway to his mouth, just for a second. Oh, a new client at the firm. Very time-sensitive case. He then put his phone face down on the table. That slight hesitation, that micro-expression of panic, told me everything. Must be important if she's texting you during dinner, I said, still playing the role of the relaxed, unsuspecting wife. He gave me this tight smile. You know how it is. Some people don't respect boundaries. The irony was so thick I almost choked on my garlic bread. After dinner, he said he needed to finish some work and disappeared into the home office. I cleaned the kitchen, making just enough noise so he'd think I was busy. Then, I silently moved to the hallway near the office door, which he'd left slightly ajar. I could hear his voice. It was low and intimate. It wasn't his client voice, or his talking to family voice. It was his bedroom voice. Can't just call whenever you want. No, she doesn't suspect anything. Just be patient. The promotion is just a few months away, and then we can be together. Yes, I miss you too. Each word was another nail in the coffin of whatever feelings I still had for him. The rage I'd been tamping down for days threatened to boil over. I wanted to burst through that door, to confront him, to end the charade right now. But that would have ruined everything. So I walked away, back to the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and pretended to wash more dishes while my mind planned my next moves. In construction, they say timing is everything. Pour the concrete too soon after it rains, and it won't set right. Rush the framing, and the whole structure is compromised. Revenge, I was learning, needed time to cure properly. The next morning, Thursday, was my coffee meeting with Leo. I arrived early, sitting at a small table in the back of a bustling cafe, the smell of coffee and pastries thick in the air. I watched him walk in, looking nervous, fidgeting with his coat. He's always been the odd one out in that family, more genuine, less concerned with appearances and money. He made some awkward small talk about his classes, then finally took a deep breath. "Ellie, I have to tell you something," he started, his eyes full of guilt. I can't live with it anymore." What he told me next confirmed everything, and then some. He'd known about Preston and Vanessa for months. He had caught them together at their parents' lake house during a family weekend I'd missed because I had to deal with a burst pipe at a client's venue, an emergency that had cost me a whole weekend of sleep. He had confronted Preston, who swore it was a one-time mistake. But it wasn't. Preston had gotten drunk after a family dinner I'd also missed and confessed the whole plan to Leo. Stay with me until he made partner, then file for a divorce and upgrade to Vanessa, using half of my business assets as his golden parachute. Leo also revealed that Vanessa was an old flame from college, someone his parents had always adored. This wasn't just an affair, it was a long-term plan to trade me in for a model that his family approved of. "I'm telling you this because I can't stomach it anymore," Leo said, his voice cracking. "I always really liked you, Ellie. I thought you were so good for him. I could never understand why my family never gave you a fair chance." I thanked him for his honesty, careful not to reveal that I already knew most of it. I asked him to keep our conversation between us, and he agreed, seeming relieved to have finally unburdened himself. As he left, he gave me a quick hug and whispered, "I'm so sorry." It was the first genuine human connection I'd felt in days, a small island of decency in an ocean of deceit. That night, I set the next phase of my plan in motion. I created a fake business emergency. I waited until Preston was home, then I called him, letting my voice crack with manufactured panic. I told him a major corporate client, our biggest one, was threatening to pull out over a contract dispute. I painted a picture of potential financial disaster, of losing the contract that was supposed to fund our entire next year. I told him I was scared of losing everything we'd built. I played on his guilt, his greed. I told him I needed his support, his legal mind, and his family's advice. He hesitated. He said he had plans. "Plans with who, Preston?" I asked, letting a little suspicion creep into my voice. He backtracked immediately. I pushed harder, letting a few fake sobs escape. He finally relented. He agreed to host an emergency family dinner at our house the next night. He said he'd call his parents and Brenda. Perfect. The trap was set. The next morning, Friday, I put the final touches on my preparations. I went to the office and acted out the part of the stressed business owner, telling my staff we might have a crisis on our hands but that I was confident we could handle it. Then I went home. I set up the dining room, but this time, I hid a folder by my seat. I loaded all the evidence onto a tablet, the screenshots, the financial records, the audio recording from the home office. Everything. I had a frank conversation with my business partner and best friend, who was shocked but fully, grimly supportive. "It's about time you showed them who you really are, Elle," he said. He knew what Preston's schooling had cost me, in more ways than one. When I got home, Preston was already there, setting the table with our good plates again. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Another family dinner. Same stage. Entirely different play about to unfold. As I headed upstairs to shower and change, he called after me, "So what's the client issue, specifically?" "I want to be prepared." I turned, giving him a tired, grateful smile. "I'll explain everything during dinner. I only want to have to go through it once." Under the hot spray of the shower, I rehearsed what I would say. How I would present the evidence. The order of revelations for maximum impact. I got dressed in the clothes Preston had always said made me look the most professional: dark jeans, a crisp blue button-down shirt, my leather shoes instead of my usual work boots. It was my costume for my final performance as his doting, clueless wife. The doorbell rang. Preston jumped, quickly ending the hushed phone call he was on. His parents arrived first, Arthur bringing an expensive bottle of wine, his handshake the same condescending grip as always. Brenda and her husband arrived next, followed shortly by Leo, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. The gang was all here. All the players were in position. As we moved to the dining room, Preston put his hand on my arm. "You okay?" he asked, his voice a perfect imitation of genuine concern. For a split second, I almost doubted everything. I almost wondered if I had constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory out of coincidences. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. I saw Vanessa's name flash on the screen before he quickly silenced it. And any last shred of doubt evaporated. I took my seat at the head of the table, the folder of evidence beside my plate. Preston sat to my right, his father to my left. As Harriet asked about the wine, I caught Leo watching me with a strange expression, part curiosity, part dread. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. I stood up, wineglass in hand, and everyone fell silent, expecting me to explain the business emergency. I smiled, looking at each of them in turn, saving Preston for last. "Before we get to the reason I called this meeting," I said, raising my glass, "I'd like to propose a toast." The confusion on their faces was just the beginning. To family. To loyalty. And to finally seeing things clearly. I sat down calmly and took a sip of Arthur's expensive wine. The room was silent, waiting. So, I began, pulling out my tablet. "About this business emergency I mentioned." Preston squeezed my hand under the table, an encouraging gesture. The absolute performance of it. I almost had to admire his commitment. "Well," I continued, "I've discovered some serious problems that threaten everything I've built. Problems developing right under my nose." Arthur leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with barely contained smugness. "Financial issues? Cash flow problems? I've always said your business model seemed precarious, Eleanor." "Actually," I said, connecting my tablet to our smart TV with a single tap. The screen flickered to life. "The problem isn't with my business. It's with my marriage." The room went absolutely silent. Preston's hand froze on mine. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice suddenly tight. "What are you doing?" "Here's the thing. When you're demolishing a structure, you don't start with the roof. You undermine the foundation first." So I played the audio file. The recording of Preston and Brenda from the previous dinner filled the dining room. Brenda's sharp voice, "Divorce her before you have kids and get stuck forever." And then Preston's, casual and cold, "Already working on it. My lawyer says we can take half her business too." I watched each face around the table. Brenda went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Harriet covered her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand, a horrified gasp escaping. Arthur's jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. And Leo just closed his eyes, like he was watching a car crash he'd known was coming. Preston just sat there, paralyzed, as his carefully constructed plan imploded in real time. Next, I swiped to the next screen. Screenshots of his texts with Vanessa. Carefully edited to be damning but not pornographic. 6 months, Preston," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. "You've been seeing her for 6 months, while I've been working 60-hour weeks to build our future." I turned to his parents. "Did you know he was cheating? Or just that he was planning the divorce?" Arthur tried to interrupt, sputtering something about privacy, but I wasn't done. I swiped again. The spreadsheet. "This," I announced, "is what I invested in our future." On the screen, in bold letters, was the final tally of every penny I'd spent putting Preston through law school. Tuition, books, rent, the bar exam prep course, even the interest I could have earned on that money if I'd invested it in my own business. The grand total, $143,682. Next screen. Documentation of his secret bank account. The cancelled home equity application. And this, I said, my voice hardening, is how he planned to thank me. The silence was deafening. Then, three things happened almost at once. Arthur stood up, knocking his chair backward. "This is ridiculous. Preston, we're leaving." Preston grabbed my arm, his face a mask of desperation. "Ellie, please, I can explain." And Brenda, the coward, tried to start deleting messages on her phone under the table. I pointed at her. "Those messages you're deleting? I already have them all. The times you helped him plan this." She froze, then looked at her husband, who was staring at her with dawning horror. Preston switched tactics. Tears formed in his eyes. "It wasn't like that. I was confused, I was unhappy. We've been growing apart for years." "Growing apart?" I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "While I was paying for your education? While I was building a future for us?" Something inside me finally snapped. 7 years, I said, lowering my voice to a dangerous whisper. 7 years I believed in us. And this entire time, I was just a stepping stone for your next promotion. That's when Arthur stepped in. "Whatever problems you two have are between you. But if you think you can intimidate my daughter and son with this ambush, you're mistaken. We have resources you can't possibly imagine." I actually laughed. A short, bitter laugh. "Resources? You mean like the $20,000 he stole from our joint account? Or the helic he tried to take out against my house?" As Arthur started ranting about all they'd done for us, I saw Preston texting furiously under the table. And that's when I dropped the final bomb. "Did Preston tell you," I said casually to the room at large, "that Vanessa is married, too?" The room went still. Even Arthur stopped mid-sentence. "Yeah. Found that out yesterday. His name is Mark." A very understanding guy, especially when I showed him the text between his wife and my husband. Preston's face drained of all color. "You, what?" "We had coffee yesterday," I said, looking directly at him. Seemed only fair he should know. That's when Arthur lost it. He grabbed the edge of my solid oak dining table, the one I had saved for a year to buy, and he flipped it. Food, wine, plates, the crystal glasses we got for our wedding, everything went flying, crashing to the floor in a symphony of destruction. Preston screamed my name, Harriet gasped, and Brenda jumped back to avoid a spray of red wine. I just sat there, oddly calm, watching 7 years of pretending shatter around us. Amidst the wreckage, Leo was the only one who moved to help, starting to pick up a broken plate. Our eyes met across the mess, and he gave me a small, sad nod. A nod of respect. Arthur pointed a shaking finger at me. "You think you've won? You're nothing. You build things with your hands because you weren't smart enough for a real career. My son made a mistake slumming it with you, but we'll fix it." I stood up slowly. "I may work with my hands, Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "But at least I built something real." "What have you built? Besides a family of liars and thieves?" He lunged at me. He actually tried to throw a punch. Leo and Brenda's husband barely caught him, holding him back while he spewed threats about lawyers and financial ruin. Preston just kept saying, "Ellie, please, let's just talk privately. This isn't how I wanted this." "How you wanted what? To divorce me? To take half of everything I built while you were sleeping with someone else?" I shook my head. "There's nothing left to talk about." I walked over and opened the front door. "I think you should all leave. Now." It took a few minutes of chaos, but they finally left. Thomas dragged his sputtering father out. Harriet followed, refusing to look at me. Brenda shot me a look of pure hatred before scurrying away. Leo was the last to leave. He paused at the door. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he said quietly. "I always thought you deserved better. Then he was gone. And then it was just Preston and me, standing in our destroyed dining room. "Where are you going to go?" he asked, his voice small, pathetic. "I already have a hotel room," I said, turning to grab the pre-packed overnight bag I'd hidden in the hall closet. "I'll be back for my things tomorrow, when you're at work." You planned all of this," he whispered, finally understanding. "I learned from the best," I replied. As I walked out the door, he called after me, his voice rising in desperation. "You'll regret this." My father wasn't bluffing about the lawyers. I didn't respond. I just kept walking. Some foundations are too damaged to rebuild. You just have to tear them down and start over. Ellie takes a deep breath, a clear emotional shift in her narration. The anger is gone, replaced by a quiet strength. If you're still listening, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. This lets me know you've given me a like, and it tells me that you're with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me. Please, comment the number 1, and let me continue my story. That night at the hotel, I slept better than I had in months. It was a deep, dreamless, exhausted sleep. The next day, I went back to the house while Preston was at work. The ruined dining room was still a mess. He hadn't even tried to clean it up. I walked past it, went upstairs, and began to pack. It was a strange, surgical process. I took my clothes, my books, photos of my family, and all of my dog Buster's stuff. I left behind the expensive jewelry he'd bought me, the designer bags, all the trappings of the life he wanted me to live. I left a framed photo of us from our honeymoon face down on the bed. I took my key off my keychain and left it on the clean, untouched kitchen counter. I'd already found a small apartment to rent near my workshop. It wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom with beige walls, but it was a sanctuary. For 2 days, I went dark. I turned off my phone, ignored my emails, and just existed. I unpacked boxes. I arranged my small kitchen, finding comfort in the familiar order of my spices and knives. I took Buster for long, meandering walks in a new park. He seemed to love it, sniffing every new smell, oblivious to the turmoil that had upended our lives. Animals know when something's wrong in a house. He seemed happier, more relaxed now that we were out of there. I tried to work, but I couldn't focus. I'd sit at my desk, staring at a spreadsheet for a client's wedding, and my mind would just go blank. So I didn't push it. I gave myself permission to just be still. On the 3rd morning, I finally felt ready. I made a strong cup of coffee, sat on the floor of my new living room with Buster's head in my lap, and turned my phone back on. It immediately started buzzing, vibrating nonstop in my hand as 3 days' worth of notifications flooded in. 47 WhatsApp messages. All from Preston. I scrolled through them, a detached observer of my own life's drama. They were a journey into the mind of a collapsing narcissist. The first ones were all caps rage. "How dare you embarrass me and my family like that, and you've ruined everything." Then they shifted to pleading, "Ellie, please call me, we need to talk, and I know I made a mistake, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling." By message 30, he was bargaining, "I'll go to therapy. I'll cut off my family. I'll do anything. Just please talk to me." Message 45 was simple, arriving late at night, "I'm sorry." The final 2 came at 3:14 a.m. The first one read, "I told Vanessa everything. About the money, about the divorce plans, she says we should still be together. She understands." And then, a minute later, she just called to break things off. Said she's trying to save her marriage with Mark. He's threatening to tell her firm about her conduct. "I have nobody now, Ellie." I read through them all without responding, feeling nothing. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just a deep, profound emptiness. Like when you finish a grueling, multi-day catering event and you realize the client will never truly appreciate the work that went into it. As I scrolled, another message popped up. A new one. Ellie, I know you've read these. Please just tell me what you want. Money? The house? I'll sign whatever you want. After everything, he still didn't get it. This was never about the money. It was about the years. The trust. The future he stole from me. I finally responded. 10 simple words. I've already sent the divorce papers to your office. His reply came instantly. Can we please meet? Just to talk. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Diane, my lawyer. Mark, Vanessa's husband, had reached out to her. He'd done some of his own digging after our coffee meeting and discovered Preston and Vanessa had been using company funds for their little getaways. He wanted to compare notes for our respective divorce proceedings. As Diane talked, I looked around my sparse apartment. A mattress on the floor, boxes still unpacked, Buster watching me with his patient, loving eyes. This wasn't how I had imagined my life at 34. Starting over again. But sometimes, you have to tear everything down to fix a compromised foundation. After hanging up with Diane, I sent Preston one final message. There's nothing left to talk about. The marriage is over. Please direct all future communication through our lawyers. Then, for the first time in 7 years, I blocked his number. A strange sense of peace washed over me. It felt like taking off a heavy coat I didn't even realize I'd been wearing. That afternoon, I took Buster for a long hike up in the hills overlooking the city. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo. Heard you moved out. Preston's staying with our parents. Dad's on the warpath, but Mom's finally asking questions about what really happened. I think his perfect son facade is cracking. I smiled and texted back, thanks for letting me know. Hope you're okay in all this. His response came a moment later. I am. Better than okay, actually. I finally told them I'm dropping out of the business program they chose for me to pursue what I actually want to do. Guess your courage was contagious. As the sun began to set, I watched Buster chase a squirrel, his tail wagging, without a care in the world. 7 years gone. Countless hours of work. A future planned and then destroyed. But in its place, there was freedom. There was truth. There was a chance to rebuild something authentic. Something that was just for me. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize, forwarded by Diane. It was from Mark. He'd sent a link to a support group for people dealing with divorces involving financial deception. The message read, "Thought you might find this helpful. You're not alone." I pocketed my phone and called out to Buster. It was time to head back. Time to make dinner. Time to unpack another box. Small steps. One day at a time. Just like any good building project. The foundation comes first. And this time, I'm making damn sure it's solid. Thank you all for listening. It really means a lot to not be alone in this. I'll talk to you all again soon.